Everyday stories, captivating tales from everyday life to inspire, entertain, and connect.
The city's evening rush was unfolding as the sun sank slowly behind the skyline, casting a warm, golden hue over the chaotic streets. The bustling life of the city hummed, as it always did at this time of day. Cars honked in the distance, the chatter of voices buzzed around every corner, and the rhythm of footsteps echoed off the pavement, all converging into a constant symphony of noise and movement. People walked with purpose, their faces lined with the stresses of the day, their eyes often fixed ahead, as if the world beyond their own thoughts didn't exist. The cool breeze carried the scent of street food and exhaust, mixing with the faint sounds of street performers trying to make a little extra for the night. Yet, amid all the noise and movement, there was something painfully still about Isaiah. A young black boy, no older than 12, stood on the corner of one of the busiest streets in the city. His body was small, thin, the dusty cheeks of a child who had lived too many days without a proper meal. His clothes were ragged, no longer vibrant, just dull shades of gray and brown from wear and tear. His shoes, barely more than scraps of leather, were held together by fraying laces. He had learned to make himself invisible in the sea of faces that passed him by. His eyes were cast downward, but his hand remained outstretched, a silent plea for the help he knew he would never truly get. Isaiah had been standing there for hours, as he often did. The world moved on around him, yet no one stopped. He had learned not to expect anything, no kind words, no moments of grace, maybe a few coins, perhaps a piece of leftover food from a generous passerby, but that was all. He had long ago trained himself to ignore the pain of hunger, to push aside the constant ache in his stomach. He had long since trained himself to turn away from the dismissive looks, the pointed stares, the whispered comments that followed him like an invisible shadow. His makeshift bed, a single weathered piece of cardboard, was tucked beneath his arm, its edges curling with age. It was all he had left in this world, this small scrap of material that served as a barrier between him and the cold, hard pavement at night. As he moved through the crowd, the cardboard pressed into his ribs, a constant reminder of how little he had. His feet were sore from standing, his throat dry and hoarse from the hours of quietly calling out for help. Each minute, each passing hour, left him more and more worn. Yet he kept his head down and his pace slow, as if in some small way he could avoid becoming too visible, too real, in a world that had taught him to be nothing more than an inconvenience. Isaiah's voice was growing hoarse. He had spent most of the day on this same corner murmuring the same quiet plea. "Please, ma'am, just a few coins for food. It's been days since I've eaten." His words felt hollow now, worn thin from repetition, as if they had lost all meaning, even to him, but still he held out his hand. He didn't have the energy to try anything else. The city rushed on around him, moving so quickly that he was barely a shadow in the corner of their eyes. The crowd pushed past him, some glancing at him with pity, others avoiding his gaze altogether. Then, as if by some small twist of fate, Isaiah's eyes caught sight of her. She was a woman, dressed to perfection, elegant, well-kept, every inch the image of wealth and comfort. Her clothes shimmered under the dimming light of the setting sun, reflecting the last rays of the day. She walked with a kind of grace that Isaiah could barely imagine, her heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement. As she adjusted her handbag, rings gleaming on her fingers, she was the picture of privilege, a stark contrast to Isaiah's broken, weathered appearance. For just a moment, a glimmer of hope sparked in Isaiah's chest. He stepped forward, his hand trembling ever so slightly, his voice soft but earnest. "Please, ma'am," he murmured, trying to catch her attention. "Just a few coins for food. It's been days since I've eaten." His voice cracked with exhaustion, with hunger, with desperation. But more than anything, it was the hope that maybe, just maybe, she would be the one to see him, truly see him, and offer a kindness, no matter how small. But the woman's gaze was cold, dismissive. She looked down at him as if he were nothing more than a nuisance, a blemish on the city's polished surface. The briefest flicker of something, was it contempt, disgust, flashed across her face. She didn't even hesitate. She pulled back, her lips curling into a sneer. "Don't touch me, you filthy thing," she snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. She recoiled as if Isaiah's presence was so revolting that it tainted her perfectly curated evening. Isaiah stood there frozen. The words stung more than he cared to admit. It wasn't the first time he had been rejected, but somehow this time it felt different. It felt like he had been reduced to something even less than human. The harshness of her words seemed to pierce him to the core, reminding him of everything he didn't have, everything he was missing. His hand slowly dropped to his side, fingers curling in on themselves, his heart sinking with a heavy weight. As the woman walked away without a second glance, Isaiah stood there in the fading light, trying not to let the tears sting at the corners of his eyes. But the ache, the deep, gnawing ache of it all, was too much. He could feel it in his chest, a pain so sharp it took his breath away. Yet, he didn't allow himself to cry. He couldn't. He had learned long ago that tears were a luxury he couldn't afford. The crowd continued to move around him, oblivious to the boy standing in their midst. Isaiah let out a shaky breath and gathered the cardboard tightly in his arms. There was nothing left for him here. No one had seen him. No one had heard his plea. He was invisible once again, just another forgotten soul on the corner of a busy street. But still, as the last sliver of sunlight slipped away behind the skyline, Isaiah took a small step forward. The world may not have noticed him today, but he would keep moving. He would keep standing, keep hoping, even if it meant standing alone. Maybe tomorrow someone would see him. Maybe tomorrow someone would care. Or maybe, just maybe, tomorrow he wouldn't have to ask at all.